And we haven't really talked a lot about the Canes last night as we're bringing in Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News. Canes had a smash and grab last night. And I use this phrase. It's a soccer phrase that, like, you didn't play well. You didn't really deserve the game, didn't deserve the win, but something you did at the end is like, whoa, we just won. Just like Mike and I are big Liverpool fans. Liverpool did that to PSG on Wednesday. No business winning the game at all. All right, now to the basketball side of this. And Mike, you and I have talked about this before. The parallels to where Duke is in relation to the rest of the ACC, which is there are a couple of good teams in it, but not a lot of quality. And I'm curious how you judge this Duke team like those Gonzaga teams that dominated the West Coast Conference every year, and then they go into the postseason, and there are people that have doubts.
There were times when BYU was a member of the league when they were probably the functional equivalent of an 8 or 9 seed. They may or may not have gotten into the tournament, but they had teams that were around that level. And of course, St. Mary's has been a terrific opponent for Gonzaga throughout their membership in the WCC as a power, as a national power. Almost without exception, St. Mary's has been right there, making it hard. The game in Moraga is always terrific, but that's it. That's it for the challenges, and the ACC has presented about the same for this Duke team. And there are a lot of people who become of the belief, and I don't understand where belief comes from without evidence. and you're presented annually, 10 years in a row, I mean, almost 10, 9 years in a row now, with evidence that the WCC does not impede Gonzaga's March success.
Right. 9
consecutive Sweet 16s. The only longer streak is, at this point, Carolina's from back in the 80s, 90s under Dean. And the only one that's equivalent is one that happened under Mike at Duke. And that's it.
Right.
And so why do people think that that's a problem?
Well, I guess because this is the world we live in, and it actually gets me to a conversation that I kind of followed online with you earlier today, because we don't judge it by Sweet 16s, right? Whether that's right or wrong, I think the general people don't look at Sweet 16. Especially when you spend the entire year in the top 10. Like if Duke got to a Sweet 16 and bowed out to, a random Texas A&M, if they lost to Texas A&M in the Sweet 16, I think people would call this season a failure.
Okay, but where did the best of the Gonzaga run in that 9 years? Where did the best of those teams end their seasons?
Oh, usually Elite Eight or Final Four.
They made 2 national championship games.
Yeah.
They lost one by the narrowest of margins. Carolina executed better down the stretch and used their physical power. And then the second, they ran into the best defensive team that I can remember seeing.
Yeah, in a pandemic year. That was the year after the pandemic.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like, if the problem is going to hit you, it's going to hit you relatively early. And that's why the 9 consecutive Sweet 16s matter. Now, you can say that you go back to 91, and Duke. This goes right back to Duke's home. 91, Vegas had almost no games in which they were challenged.
Right.
And they were much better than everybody until they ran into Duke's burgeoning dynasty. And then they got themselves in a close game, and Duke, Danny hit the shot, and Christian hit the free throws, and Duke wins. And so that could be a problem for the Devils because they have been in close games, and let's be frank, they failed almost every time. The closest they had to a close game in which they succeeded was the State Road game, but the Kansas game, the Kentucky game, the Clemson game, they failed every time. And so, but at least they know, at least they have experience. The Vegas team didn't have any.
Yeah.
And this team has had experience. Now, they don't know what to do, in a sense, but they do know what not to do. And that is a lesson that can help you win.
Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. All 3 losses for Duke. They had the ball with a chance to win in the last 30 seconds of the game. They turned it over on all three occasions. This last one at Clemson, which happened about a month ago, Cooper Flagg slipped on. He was probably his own perspiration. Slipped on the court, and that was that. The two turnovers, one against Kansas, the other against Kentucky, in reverse order, happened back in, I guess, November. I think Duke they're more than capable of beating every team they play. I think the only team I would say right now today I would choose over Duke if I had to pick a game for my life would be Auburn, because I think that they are a little bit more physical and maybe a little bit more athletic all over the court. But man, this Duke team is like their weapons. There's almost nobody you can not check. Everybody's got to be guarded. The only one I would let do what he wants. If Kamen Malawach wants to shoot a three, I'd let him do that. There ain't nobody else on the floor that you can do that with Duke. Every single other player can hurt you. But I guess this is what's been, I think, impressive about this team. And I don't know when this happened, but they stopped playing the opponent. And I think they started playing to a standard. I know John has talked about it, but it reminds me of past Duke teams that were great and went on to either win or challenge for a national championship. Actually, it reminds me more of the 2001 team than any other team that they've had, because they are absolutely playing to prove a point, it seems, every single time out. In some ways, that's really encouraging.
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, what they did to Wake Monday, was it?
Yeah.
Earlier this week was just ridiculous. I mean, that is a good team. I mean, it's probably not an NCAA team unless they find a way to conquer the ACC tournament, but it's a good team. And to absolutely take them apart in the way that Duke did was staggering. And the interesting thing about this Duke team relative to Auburn, and of course they've already played once and Duke won, and I was there and happy to have been there because it really informed my analysis of this season so much to have been there that night. What I saw was a really terrific college basketball team and another team that has pros. There are guys who will play for money, no doubt, at Auburn.
Yeah.
But they don't have the guys that Duke has, and those guys usually win. I don't mean every time you have great players you win, but usually the team that wins has those kinds of players, and there aren't very many teams in this NCAA tournament. And I'm not talking you have to have Cooper Flagg, a generational guy. I'm just mean guys the NBA wants and wants early usually win the NCAA tournament. And Auburn, I don't know, maybe Tahad Pettiford in a couple of years is a first-round pick. I don't think Janai Broome will be. I don't think Baker Mazar or any of the others will be. And so I look at Auburn and say that team has to break some molds to win it. But this Duke team doesn't have to break any. They just have to be the best version of what they are.
Mike DeCourcy is joining us from the Sporting News at TSN. Mike, not only on Twitter but also on Blue Sky. Who is a comp for Cooper Flagg as a college player? Is he Danny Manning? Because I know here at Duke, I compare him not as a player, but as a phenomenon to Zion Williamson. And Flagg is not going to reach Zion can't take your eyes off status, because Zion was beyond anything we have seen in the college game in a long time. But I think Flagg is a better basketball player than Zion Williamson. There's nothing he doesn't do well. There's nothing. He does everything really well. So what is a comp for Cooper Flagg?
I like the Manning comp, but the problem with the Manning comp is that, Danny Manning had a phenomenal 88. He was terrific, but he wasn't this. He was not this. Now, some of them might have been that the competition was better or whatever. You look at that Oklahoma team, they had Stacey King and Mookie Blaylock, multiple pros, et cetera. But he didn't have this year. There was competition for the National Player of the Year that year. There were, obviously there is in this case as well, but there was competition that year in part because Danny wasn't uniformly great. I mean, that Kansas team came into the NCAA tournament as a 6 seed for a reason. And some of it was that they weren't as talented around him, and they had a huge injury with Archie Marshall blowing his knee out. But some of it was just that Danny took a while to figure out how to be great in that atmosphere, and then ultimately when he did, he was. Now, if you want to say Danny as like what Danny was in the NCAAs has been kind of what Cooper has been for most of this year, I think that's a fair comp. Danny was a little taller, and he probably wasn't quite as dynamic as Cooper is, but that same varied package of skills and impact. The other thing that I think is undervalued about Cooper is something, again, that I noticed when I was in the gym that you might not see on television is look, he's a great rebounder, but he's not just a great rebounder because he's putting up numbers. He's a great rebounder because he understands the art of rebounding or the science of rebounding, whichever it is, at a level that only the best do. He reads the shot and the rim like Rodman did, like Paul Silas did, although Paul was, okay, it's coming off left or right, I'm going to own that spot. With Rodman, it was, it might fly deep, I'll get there. And that's because the game changed a little bit. And that's kind of what Cooper is. He gets to where the ball is, and then he owns that spot. And he's a phenomenon in that sense, and I don't think it's appreciated as much as it could be.
I mean, he leads Duke in every category. The only thing I think he's not going to end up leading Duke in is blocked shots. I think Malawash probably gets him there. But it's just he's had a remarkable season. Let me quickly fold this into the game coming up tomorrow night in Chapel Hill. And I know the committee hasn't yet expanded the field to comfortably put North Carolina in yet. We're probably a few years away from that. I know Tar Heels fans are like, look, we're kicking everybody in the teeth. They have won 6 in a row. I still think they need at least one, and I'm assuming they're not going to beat Duke, even if they play them 2 more times. I think Duke wants this game as much as North Carolina or more, and I think they want the ACC tournament as much or more than everybody. I think they want to collect all the trophies going forward this year. But without a win over Duke, if they can get a win over a Clemson, maybe and a Louisville or an SMU, is that enough for UNC?
If they don't get Duke, Clemson and Louisville would at least put them in the picture, both of them. One of them, I don't see how that could be enough. That would be 2 quad 1 wins. That would be the results metrics for Carolina are not bad, but do they outweigh the two like I said, you have to get both. So do they outweigh 2-10 or 1-10 against quad 1? Actually, it would be 1-11 after tomorrow if your prediction holds, and then they would get, if they only got 1, then they'd be looking at 2-12, and I just don't see how they can do it, how they can put somebody in there. I mean, they've won 6 in a row, but let's be honest about the 6 in a row. Their average net ranking of that 6 is 155, and I looked at the Missouri Valley Conference. And that's about what you'd get in terms of an average if you beat like 4-8 or 4-9 or however many it takes to get to 6. That's about the average you'd get in that window. And like they're not putting Bradley into the tournament because they they were the second best team in the Valley and beat all those teams that I'm talking about. So I think that's a problem for Carolina. They played in a overly aggressive non-conference schedule and weren't ready for it. And then they go into a league that's just not good enough, and they didn't do enough against the better teams in the league to say we're definitely a tournament team.
So funny, last year I railed against the machine because I felt the ACC performed pretty well actually in the non-conference, but the metrics didn't show that. And it was hard to get quad 1 wins unless you were on the road against one of the top 3 or 4 teams. And this year, the ACC gets exactly what they deserve. They were a disaster in the non-conference. And the truth of the matter is that North Carolina drastically overscheduled. They have 8 of their losses are to teams that are in the top 25, and I think to like 6 of those teams will probably be on the 1 or the 2 line. Like, they didn't win any of those games, obviously. They could end up playing Duke 3 times and go 0 for 3. Auburn, Alabama, Michigan State, Florida. Like, why didn't you schedule Tennessee also? It was a terrible, great non-conference schedule, but they didn't win any of those games. But they were close in some of them, but it doesn't make a difference. But really, what's going to keep them out are losses to Stanford, Wake Forest, and Pitt, because they couldn't afford to lose any of those games.
Yes. Adam, I did a piece today about the SEC and why it is where it is. And one of the things that it doesn't mention the ACC, but sort of in the back of my mind as I was doing this, I'm remembering last March when when so many in the ACC were yelling at the rest of the world for not getting it. And what the SEC did 10 years ago when they went through a 3-year period in which they got 8 at-large bids total.
Yeah.
And so they had 11 teams over that 3-year period. They said, how do we get better? And they went to work, and they've done the work, and they got better. And now they're the most dominant league relative to its season that we've ever seen in college basketball. They did the work. Instead of complaining, they did the work. And that's something that I would love to see the ACC do. Look, college basketball's better when the ACC's great. Mm-hmm. When it's up there with the Big Ten and Big 12 and the SEC, and there are arguments to be had about the best league and all that. The ACC basketball is magical. It's something I grew up with, not to the extent that, say, John Feinstein did growing up in Pittsburgh. It wasn't, Pitt was not yet in the ACC. But I remember I'm old enough to remember the 74 State Maryland game and basically the most important game in college basketball history at the end of the day, other than the historic occasion of Texas Western beating Kentucky. I mean, relative just to the sport itself and not the social implications, it was the most important game that was ever played in college basketball. And so I love the ACC. I want to see it better.
And Texas Western Kentucky was in ACC country at Cole Fieldhouse in College Park, Maryland. I'm with you. But I'm also a realist. I'm honest about this. Last year I thought the ACC was better than it was given credit. This year I don't. I think this is a 3-bid league unless North Carolina does something, because I think Carolina is good enough to win a couple of games in the NCAA tournament. But they don't deserve a spot to this point, and those two things can both be true at the same time. All right, I will let you go. I appreciate your time. Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News. All we got to do is get a draw against PSG next week, and we go on to the quarterfinals of Champions League.
They call it the Elite Eight in Europe. No,
they don't. They're probably not allowed to. They're probably not allowed to. All right, sir. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, Adam.